everybody not get their nameplate? It doesn't look like that's the case. So, we have a little different venue tonight. We have Jeff Trickett, who's standing next to me. I've known Jeff about 20 years. I got to meet him when I was renovating a house that we live in now, and I needed some help putting in a steel beam. And I don't know how we got hooked up, but we got hooked up. He brought over 4 or 5 guys, and they put in a steel beam in this house that I was renovating to carry an addition on the 2nd floor. And the 2nd floor is still standing. So it was a good job, thank you. And we just got acquainted and stayed in touch. I think, were you out of Ohio State then or not yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Since then, he's developed a huge interest and expertise in what I call information technology, or maybe more digital technology, with what you guys would call it, and in particular, blockchain technology, which has always and still interests me, and I'm trying to learn what it is, and every time I have Jeff in, I learn a little more, but not enough to be the one who explains it all to you guys. So he always comes in every year and explains it to my classes, what blockchain is and how it can relate to sustainability. That's the whole point. It got started, and he'll tell you more about it, as a technology for protecting transactions of Bitcoin, which was the first form of cryptocurrency, and that's about all I know about Bitcoin. I guess in addition, I have learned that Bitcoin is not just a special case of what we're trying to do with blockchain technology and sustainability, but it was the foundational work that led to much broader applications that have applications in sustainability. And then this year he introduced me to his friend and now my friend Eric Lehman, who's sitting there with an iPhone or whatever device he's using to record things, because Jeff will not speak with PowerPoint slides, but the whole session will be recorded. And last week when we talked to the Eads class, it took, the recording came out in 3 parts. So what you will find on Carmen, when I post the proceedings for tonight, will be part 1, 2, and 3 of Jeff's lecture, which he will do totally without any visual aids. Jeff assures me he's not one of the Lehman brothers, but he's smart enough to be. And he and Jeff have some very interesting business ideas that they're pursuing related to blockchain. So without taking any more time, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. Thank you for being here. And I think we have a very interesting night tonight.
All right, thanks, Neil.
Woo!
Okay, so I always like to ask if anybody here wants to take a crack at describing what the blockchain is. How many people have heard, I mean, has most of you heard of the blockchain? It's become a real buzzword. When we started doing this, not very many people had heard of the blockchain yet. And now it's becoming a very commonly used buzzword that, and I'll say that it's a buzzword. That is one of the first things that I would say about the blockchain, is that it is used to describe several different things that are not the same thing. You know, as Neil was saying, and by the way, Neil, he's getting to be more of an expert. You're getting pretty close, actually.
Doesn't feel like it.
But the blockchain, the original version of the blockchain, actually came about because of Bitcoin. I know everybody knows what Bitcoin is.
They've heard of it, they may not know what it is.
Yeah, so Bitcoin is the first globally demonstrated cryptocurrency that really got true traction in the world. And up until Bitcoin, there were a lot of different attempts at creating something that was a true cryptocurrency. no one really succeeded at it. There were a lot of gaps in it. A lot of people cracked the different things that people tried. There were these really well-known problems with having a distributed cryptocurrency, and I'll just mention the two major ones were having multiple transactions. So if I have some cryptocurrency and I want to exchange it with you, there were a lot of things that were allowing me, if I could say, I'm going to give you a piece of cryptocurrency, I'm going to give you a piece of cryptocurrency, give you, and walk away when I only had one the whole time, right? There were gaps in these structures that were well-known problems, with being able to forge it, manipulate it, that made it not reliable. And what Bitcoin did, they brought into being this concept of the blockchain. And I'll just focus at a very, very high level here. What the blockchain does is it allows us to use these cryptographic technologies that have actually been around for a long time, and these specific data modeling techniques that have also been around for a long time. But it allows us to combine them and create an immutable distributed ledger. So at the foundation of the blockchain and Bitcoin, that is the most important concept, is that you have this idea of an immutable ledger, which means that no one can forge it. And that every time something is added to it, when you add information to this ledger, it can never be changed and it will never go away. So as long as that distributed data set exists, all the data in it is going to be intact forever. Now, most of it is encrypted, so it would take you thousands and thousands of years if you used all of the computing power on the planet. You could not feasibly crack the information that's on there, but what it does is it gives you a basis for having security and confidence in knowing that that data is intact all the way across the network. So that's the real power of the blockchain. And we use technologies that are similar to the blockchain that improve on some of its limitations, and it has a lot of limitations. That's one thing that I think is worth mentioning. So I know that Neil's purpose for having me explain this to you is that there are all these use cases where the blockchain can be applied in the area of sustainability. It is a powerful, powerful tool that can be used in a lot of different situations that give you guys the ability to bring knowledge into wherever you are and provide solutions to say wherever you're employed that they might not be aware of. And I think that that's the real idea here, is to show you that there are different techniques and methodologies that you can use to achieve sustainability and sustainable models that were not possible before this kind of technology existed. So let's see, the other attributes to the blockchain that make it powerful is that it's distributed, which means that everyone has the ability to verify the data that is on there. So if someone tries to forge some information that's in there, there are mechanisms that you yourself can validate the data, and you can make sure that it is valid. And that's pretty powerful, and it's also it's unalterable. So that concept of it being immutable means that it can't be changed. So you have the ability to make your data distributed, and that wasn't really possible before. It sort of was, but you needed all these other mechanisms in place. What we have now is the ability to distribute data and continue to add to that data and have absolute confidence that all the data across the entire network is intact. So that concept is extremely powerful. It allows you to do things like track shipping crates in an area that is otherwise very volatile, or it allows you to certify the validity say, sustainable materials, or to grade things and certify them in a way that anyone can actually do that. And it just opens the door for all kinds of different applications that were not possible before. So I think that that's the power of this technology. One thing that I would say that is really important to keep in mind is that there are a lot of different blockchains. So when somebody says, yeah, we're using the blockchain to say store, electricity on the electric grid, right? So that's a really good use case for this. Say you've got, solar panels on your house, and so you're actually generating electricity. You've got the electric company that is selling you electricity, and in a lot of cases, they're actually buying back electricity. So you've got this open market for the exchange of electricity. How do you measure that? And how do you take all of these different points on this grid and allow them to communicate asynchronously, right? So that they don't, instead of having to communicate with one central point, they're sending the information across a grid, and it's being stored in a way that you can be confident that you will actually get credited for, that hour of electricity that you provided to the grid. So that's one example of, some of the use cases for this that they weren't really possible before, and now it's taking flight. Like I said, the blockchain, it has become such a buzzword that people are using it for everything. They're certifying grapes, and they're certifying wines, and they're certifying almost anything you can think of. And that tells you a couple things. It tells you that the technology is valuable. It tells you that there's a reason that people are using it for these things. So
an analogy I just thought of is, and I'm guilty of it as anybody else, we talk about, hey, would you make me a Xerox copy of this? We really mean a photostatic copy, but we use the word Xerox, which is a very specific process. It's become a verb.
yeah,
And
that's a great analogy.
I just thought of that you described it.
Yeah.
I thought I would share it, yeah.
No, that's an excellent analogy. And, kind of along those lines, you have the ability, so like one of the most powerful things about the blockchain and blockchain-like technologies, you have the ability to, say, create contracts, right? So it really it ties right into this whole idea of, you can take a conceptual thing, you can document it. So Neil and I could come to an agreement and say in the paper world, we would write that out on 2 pieces of paper. We'd each keep a copy, keep them safe. We might make a 3rd copy and give it to our attorneys, or 4th copy, whatever. But that's the concept that we've relied on for hundreds of years, right? Thousands of years. Being able to, we write something down and we store that record of it. But what happens if say Neil's copy gets destroyed somehow, and then we're relying on mine, unless we did give it to our attorneys or whatever. But, the point is that we're still reliant on a limited number of copies. And what this concept does is it allows us to still make that same document, put it in the blockchain, right? Which essentially means you're distributing it and adding it to this distributed ledger. And then it exists for perpetuity, until people are not using that data set anymore. So it's a very interesting thing, and it does not rely on any central server. So that's another key piece that makes it different. So, we're used to interacting, all the time, say like writing these contracts or something like that, but then we're relying on this central server, right, that is storing that, and we're using that as our intermediary, right? So the difference here is that there is no intermediary. We are the intermediary. So that makes it fundamentally different, because there's nothing preventing whoever owns that server from changing the data. If you're relying on them to be kind of the gatekeeper for keeping that data safe, you know, that fraud happens all the time, and, you know, like, outages happen, data is lost, data is corrupted. What is really powerful about this is, in a blockchain scenario, every individual that is participating in that, in the blockchain as a node, which means that they are a storehouse of some portion of that data, and in a lot of cases, all of the data. What you're doing is that you're distributing the risk across everybody that's using it. So that's another really powerful aspect of it. Yeah.
Does this mean that anyone has access to the data?
Yes, you have direct access to the data, but in most cases it's encrypted. So like and again, this is why I keep saying, like, the blockchain means so many different things. But in most of these cases, each block of data is fully encrypted. There might be portions of the data that are not encrypted. So you might be able to read parts of the data so that you can kind of tell what is in there, but you don't have direct access to
But the creator
core
of the data or the contract would have complete.
That's
access.
right. Right. So like it might register that Neil and I wrote this contract, and we might have decided to put notes that are publicly available about what that contract says, but it might not have the numbers, or it might not have the core of the contract itself. It might not be visible to anybody because it's encrypted. But yeah, that's a great question. And in most cases, the way that this is designed, it makes it exponentially more difficult to crack the encryption of the data, the more blocks that are added to that chain. So it becomes more and more difficult to reverse and try to like decrypt that information, the more people that are actually using it. So it seems counterintuitive. It seems like, okay, so if I put my personal, secure, sensitive information in the blockchain, doesn't that put me at risk? Well, the reality is that we've demonstrated through thousands and thousands of use cases that it is actually safer than any other form of encryption that we've discovered so far. Because, you know, with every single block, it becomes more and more difficult to reverse engineer it. So it's actually a very, very safe way of storing personal information or sensitive information. Yeah.
So how do we access to the data we want when we're using blockchain?
Could you say it again?
So how do we like access to the data we want when we're using blockchain?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you access that data? So if say you want to get your information back out of it. So the key is that you have a unique hash that it's the only combination that will unlock that data. And it's set to a specific level of complexity that makes it incredibly difficult to reverse, to decrypt it. And one of the key concepts of the blockchain itself is that the verification of each block is stored in the preceding block. So as soon as you add to that block, you can actually parse through the entire chain to find the particular block that you're looking for. You have the validation that you know that that is the exact block that you are expecting to have, and then you can use that specific key that you alone have access to decrypt that block, and then it makes the data available.
Are the hashes language specific?
No, it's just a string of characters.
But the characters vary from language to language.
That is true, and depending on how you translate it, they could show up as different characters. So, it's really ones and zeros.
You talk about Japanese language, with all the characters they have.
Yeah, and you could represent that hash in Japanese, right? But it wouldn't be any more meaningful than it is in English. All it is it's
But you have to know what language is.
That's true. That is true. And technically, it's just a string of, we translate it as characters because that's the simplest way for us to interact with it. It's also the simplest way to transmit it across a network. It's the simplest way to access it. But yeah, you could choose to represent that in
But
different.
everybody in the network has to speak that character language? You can't make up the characters, can you?
No, I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, the way, it's all built into these algorithms. So it's completely independent. We choose to represent it as characters, but the reality is it's just a string. Really, at its core, it's ones and zeros that are just certain length, and then it just so happens that each block of that can be represented as a character in a neat way. So that's what makes it simple, is that it translates so that each one of those combinations will always result in some character. So, you know, if you did it in a different language, you might have gaps. You have things that are called unprintable characters. So if you did it in a different encoding, that's what they call that. It's just what encoding paradigm you're using to translate those ones and zeros into something that we can read, something that makes sense to a human being. But at its core, it's just ones and zeros. So it's a very complex chain of ones and zeros that are assembled in a way that when you apply a decryption algorithm to it, it will actually take that key and unlock this block so that it becomes something that you can read or that you could use for whatever. So yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That's actually a pretty deep question.